Hey customizers, welcome to the next episode in the Sunbow Firebat series. In the last episode we did some filling and some sanding, and I've got these parts roughly about where I want. I know that doesn't sound too definitive, but well, I'm running low on caffeine, so there it is. As you can see, I brought the plastic mostly back up to its original shine, and that's more than enough for the primer to compensate for. What I did notice though, in the damage I was repairing, was that the tip of this fin is broken. So as you can see here, they don't look the same. So I've got to make them look the same. Now, that could be done with some styrene, a couple of pieces of styrene, but we're going to try something new and fun. The reason being is that when I looked at this piece as well, when I was taking the wings off, one of the wings broke, and on this side, the bracket broke. So, it's this side. So you can see this little nubbin that comes up here on all of the brackets, except down here where it's snapped off and I couldn't find the piece. So I need to make one of those. And what it looks like is basically forms a hole for the pin on the wing to sit in. And then it's tight enough to allow for movement and holding in different positions. Could we recreate that with sheet styrene? I'm not going to say no. If you took a thick enough piece and cut and drilled and all sorts of stuff, you probably could. Is it the best answer? I don't think so. And that brings us to the whole point of this particular episode, and that's to introduce you to Milliput. Milliput is a two-part epoxy putty used by model builders and toy refurbishers or repairers, whatever you want to call them, to recreate missing plastic. I know that sounds kind of silly, but that's exactly what it does. And you can make anything you want out of it. It's a two-part epoxy, so you basically cut off part of one, part of two, mix them together, and you carry on. Now there are different kinds. This one here is the water-based one, and it's got a resin and a hardener in it, and all you do is mix them together like I said. So let's get into the dirty bits, and let's make some Milliput. What I like, there we go, good. I just want to make sure it was still good. It's been a while since I've used this. You can cut it with an X-Acto knife, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Now the thing with this, it's kind of like with some of the other products we've talked about, is it's better to make more than you need, and there will be a little bit of wastage. If you get it nailed down so you can gauge exactly how much you need for whatever size of project, well done you. But I cannot, so I just cut off a wedge. And there we go. So cover these back up. It's good to keep these things wrapped in their original plastic. You don't want air to get to these because it'll start to harden them. And this box has lasted me, well, a few years actually. And it is fantastic. I've used it for multiple projects. It's sandable, it's paintable, and you can treat it the same way as acrylic putty in that you can manipulate it with water. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So that's roughly the same volume, all things being equal. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to knead them together. And you're just folding it into itself until you get a uniform light gray color. And the good thing about this is that it lets you make all sorts of different shapes. I forgot to mention that it's also sandable. It sands very nicely. Some putties and stuff will tend to crumble when you sand them, not the Vallejo putty, but putty can go so far. The putty's best for filling dents and imperfections and seams, whereas this Milliput stuff is good for making details. And it really has been a lifesaver, so recommended. We're trying to keep the tools as basic as possible, but I think quite honestly that there's some you just can't avoid, and I think this is one of them. This is good for repairing figure waists and thumbs as well. If you want to see what that's like, go check out a channel called Toy Polloi, and he gives you a fine tutorial on how to repair G.I. Joes with Milliput and staples, actually. Staples or paper clips, yeah. And I just wetted my fingers in some nice clean water there. Keeping this stuff moist is key. It doesn't have to be gobbing wet, but it helps you work with it. And I think we're almost there. It looks like chewed bubblegum. I'm trying not to think about that too much because that grosses me out, but it is what it is. And I think we're okay. It has a good working time. I don't remember exactly what it is, so let's read it off the box here. Yeah, the instructions are right on the back of the box. It's pretty straightforward. It says at least 5 minutes until the color is uniform and free from streaks. We're pretty much there, I think. It becomes rock hard in 3 to 4 hours at normal room temperature. Store in cool, dry conditions, and there's more information on the website. So you got 3 to 4 hours to work with this stuff, and then it becomes solid. And by that I mean hard. You can make whatever shape you want out of it. It won't lose the shape. It'll just become what we want it to become. So in this case, I'm also going to use, I think, my little trusty pencil here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a Q-tip and I'm going to cut off the cotton bud part because I need the stick. And Q-tips are arguably the best for doing that. Depends on what you want to do, right? What size of hole do you need? So, of course it's cute. I got a super sharp knife. There we go. And the Q-tip's fighting me. It's fighting me. So there we go. And I'm going to use that as the tool to help mold that type of hole, right? So it's got to fit in there. The Q-tip is basically the right size. And I'm just going to use it to push and prod. So the thing with Milliput is, well, like I said, it's sandable, but you really want to blend it into the sides or blend it into the surrounding area. And you can do that just with a wet finger and smooth it out. And the good thing is once this stuff dries, if you need to, there's some little imperfections. You can put putty on top of that. So it's quite amazing stuff. So I think, yeah, we're going to call that good. Say it's been 5 minutes-ish, maybe. So I'm going to take off a little piece, just a little piece, and that's even there probably too big. And this is done with the Mark I eyeball. There's no, take off exactly this much for this piece type of equation or formula. I'm just trying to get what I want on there. So it's really, and we're trying to mimic the other shape. And if we do a good enough job, you shouldn't notice it. In fact, after a while, you should even forget that it's there, which is the idea. We talked about you noticing all the flaws in your own work in other series. But, well, yeah, that's all there is to it. This stuff is quite excellent. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it on there. We got quite good. Quite good. It's a little big. A little big. I might even be able to tear off even more. So you know what? Let's do that. Let's be as precise as we can. So I'm going to cut this. Drag my knife through it. Hopefully not my fingers. There we go. And I'm just going to put it on there. And you can see right now it's firmly seated in there. So if I wanted this to disappear, I could totally do that. And all you're doing is you're just manipulating. My fingers are getting a little dry. The key to this stuff is keeping your fingers moist. There we go. So now I'm just manipulating the putty. There's not much to say about that. So, and then with all the sanding tools I've shown you, we're going to bring it down to size. So once I relocate my Q-tip, I'm just going to lift. And then I got to shape it around the Q-tip. So what we want at the end is, well, we want the right shape. We want the right shape, don't we? At least close enough to it. This stuff takes practice, and I'm always trying to practice, but some skill sets you don't use all the time and they fade, and that's just part of it. So we got good enough there, and it's a back and forth thing. It's a patience thing, but the patience will pay off. Okay, so that's like that. I'm just comparing it to the other side here. It's a little thin. A little thin. Maybe we'll add a little bit more. A little more to that one side there. Just to make it a little bit more bulky. And you can always sand it down afterwards too, right? So This is the real trick here. You're just making the general shape. You don't have to be super accurate right off the bat, but you don't want to go the other way either. You don't want to be too blobby. And right now this is still significantly larger than the piece we're trying to replicate, but we can remove material. You can add material later too, but it's well, it's called Milliput epoxy sculpt or whatever. So let's be like sculptors and bring that in. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm doing right there. So you can see the original shape here. There we go. Okay, it's solid like that, and you can see here it's much larger, relatively speaking, and that's fine. I'm going to let that sit there, and then we'll just take it down to where it needs to be afterwards, and we'll dress it up. Right? This is the finer work that you're going to have to do on some of your projects. The good thing is we're not done with the Milliput yet. So now what I'm going to do, like I said, if you notice the shape here, you'll see that there's this almost like a tongue part, and then there's a perpendicular fin that comes out of that part. You could do it with 2 pieces of styrene, but given the nature of the break, and the fact that I wanted to show you how Milliput works, I wanted to show you some of the stuff you can do with it. And I haven't even fully exploited all of its properties yet. There we go. And you can even cut this with scissors too if you wanted to. It's just like a thick Play-Doh type thing. So I'm just going to cut that part off. It's always better to have more on there than you need. You can always sand it down. Like I said, you can add to it, but why would you want to go backwards? Why would you want to go backwards? Always forwards. As much as you can anyway. Always forwards. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Q-tip here. I'm going to wet this. This part's dry. There we go. And you can blend it in, and you don't want to necessarily have it just butted up against the part you're trying to replace. If you can blend it into the part you're fixing, that just adds some extra strength to it. And this stuff is very strong. Very strong. So there we go. And what the water's doing is the same thing like with the putty. It's helping you smooth it and form it and shape it. And we can do a lot of this with our fingers. We don't have to just glob it on there and wait for the sanding process. Although the sanding process will finish it off rather nicely. There we go. We're getting there. We're getting there. No rush. No rush. I'm going to pinch it from this side here because, like I said, what I'm trying to do is also match that lip that's there. Don't give me any lip. Here we go. I'm just going to cut that part off. Okay, so it's come off a bit. We'll just put it right back on. The whole point of this is to just enjoy the process. Remember when you were kids and we all like getting our hands dirty working with clay and mud and whatever else? Same thing. Same thing. I think that's good. That's a good spot to work from. Okay, so what I've done here is I've matched the angle, for the most part, just using my finger here, so there'll be some imperfections. So I've matched the angle here, and I've got enough bulk on there, I think, that when I sand it down, I'll be able to sand in this edge that I need to match this side here. So that will give us some good work to do. And now I just have to wait for it to dry. It dries relatively quickly. It will be absolutely rock hard in 4 hours. Or less, depending on the conditions in your room. Now, does that mean that I want to sand it before it gets rock hard? If you remember, we were talking about sanding super glue and you want to get it before it fully cures. In this case, no, it's fine. In fact, it's actually better if it becomes fully cured, because then you can work it better with tools without worrying about any crumbling, because sometimes, as you may or may not know, this stuff like this will dry on the outside but still be damp inside. So if you sand off that top layer, then suddenly it becomes crumbly because you're trying to sand wet things. So it's just best to leave it at this point. So there you go. Get in there. Get in there. And you can put glue on top of this. It paints well. All that stuff. It really is a remarkable tool, and certainly a boon for us. as customizers when we fix the vehicles that nobody wants. Right? Most people aren't into buying broken stuff anymore because they don't want to fix it. And I understand that. But that's good for us. Oops, sorry about bumping the camera in there. Only had 17 coffees today. I'll just blend that a little bit more. And there you have it. So now what we're going to do is I have to let that cure so we can work on it and sand it. And then we'll go from there and we'll be able to really check our work. This will be incorporated into the other sanding and puttying that we did on the wings and fins. And we may have to go back to it, and that's fine. This is just a much more detailed part of this process. So I'm going to let those cure, and we'll be right back. All right, now that we've left everything to cure, I actually ended up leaving it overnight, which is never a bad practice, right? You never get penalized for waiting a little bit longer for something to set and or cure. I've started working on some of this stuff already, and what we have here is we have our hardened and set and cured and whatever you want to call it, Milliput. I almost forgot what I was using. And what I did is I went in, this is the part that I puttied before. I actually added a little bit of Milliput into that gap there because the putty was being mostly successful, but I had made a bunch of the Milliput combination, so I figured I might as well just use some in there too. And now you can see where I did the repair work and that it is sanded flush on both sides. The key to working with this stuff is if you put too much on at once, you saw the size of the blob, if you will, that I put on the wing here, and then bring it down to what you needed. It's better to have too much than not enough. Can you add to it? Yes, of course. However, treat it almost like sculpting, where you take a solid block of something and then wick away the stuff you don't need and you're left with your final sculpture. At least that's the way I like doing it. If you find you want to do it a different way, then by all means experiment and pick what works for you. So what I've done here is I'll bring your attention to this fin, because it's I'm working on this part here still as well, but the fin here is kind of the neat part. So depending on what kind of sanding instrument you're using, I also have these sanding sticks here. I don't remember if I've shown you those before on previous projects, but these are different grits of sandpaper that are basically on a foam stick. And the advantage to these is that because there's no sandpaper on the sides, I can do some interesting things with them. And so in this piece here, let's get the trusty pointer out. Put my hand there so you can see it against the paper towel. What I've done is I've sanded a hard edge right into here to mimic that lip that we have to recreate. And all that is basically putting this on a slight angle towards where I want the lip to make and just start running the stick through. And I've already started to create a hardened edge there. See if I can get the camera to catch it. What's the magic angle? You can kind of see the shadow of it right here, but there is a hard edge starting to form there. And same on this side as well. Maybe it's a little bit more visible on this side. Or maybe not. Well, you can kind of see it from that angle. Anyway, I'm getting those two edges there to mimic the lip. The thing with working with Milliput is that you can make this stuff, and it's rock hard right now. You can slap this on the end of something. If you want it to be strong and sturdy, it's actually good practice to drill and pin it. We'll go over that maybe later, but all that is taking something like a piece of paper clip or staple, finding the right drill bit for it, drilling it in, putting it there. So it just gives something for this to grab onto. Blending it into the surface that you're doing it to also helps. But what I've noticed sometimes, depending on the structure I'm making with the Milliput, is that sometimes when you're sanding it and working it, whatever was holding it there in the first place gets weakened by the sanding and then it comes off. It's not a big deal. All I did was I sat it back on where it's supposed to go, and then I covered it in that watery super glue that I have right here. And just a little drop, and it goes over top and hardens it, and then you can keep sanding and working it. We talked about the super glue getting super hard and being difficult to sand, but that's just kind of one of the things I work with when I'm doing this sort of thing. So I'm just going to show you the method and the pattern I'm using. I swapped over to this stick here. And all it is I'm working on that lip right now, and it's just getting that edge in there. The light's catching it there quite nicely, so you can see that lip there. So that part is actually pretty much done, and it's still coming into shape on this side here. So I'll just work it a bit And I can't stress enough, honestly, when I was younger and trying to do models and stuff like that, I would force the sandpaper in there and, you know, try and use brute force and ignorance to sand something down, because I was always in a rush to get things finished. Just because I wanted, you know, I wanted that project done, or I wanted to see it on my shelf or what have you. And honestly, the trick to good sanding is just taking your time and let the tool do the work for you. Because then you can go too far, or you just tire yourself out for little to no gain in time saved. And now I'm just, what I'm doing right now is I'm on these strokes here, I'm just rotating the stick in, and all it does is it basically takes, if my knuckles were the corner of the stick and this was the surface, by doing that it basically just helps it cut in a little bit to help define that edge I'm looking for. And that's all we're doing here. I haven't touched the gap in between here yet, so you can see it's a little misshapen in there, and that'll be addressed very, very shortly. And that's all we're doing is blending. And it'll scratch the plastic here a bit. Don't worry about that, because then you can use your other finer sanding papers to bring that back into the proper shape. Now, the other thing too, what I find that's really helpful when working on projects like this with this type of product is don't sand one part all at the same time. As in, if I want to make this part of the top part here, the Milliput, the same shape as the leading edge here, I won't do it all in one go and then flip over and do it. I'll actually go back and forth and gently work on each part, working the overall shape to the final product. Doing one feature at a time, you may find that you go too far. So what that does is it forces you to take a break, basically. So I worked on this edge for a bit, and I was like, okay, well that looks okay. And then I came over and I worked this side a little bit. And I said, okay, let's take a break there. And I worked the edge a little bit. And by doing that, it actually creates that opportunity to gauge your work and see if you've gone too far, not enough. Or, you know, in some cases, maybe you got to start over and add some more Milliput on there. And that's fine. There's no... I used to be so convinced that you had to do this in one fell swoop, even before YouTube was a thing. When people were talking about it, like, oh yeah, I just sanded that off. I was like, okay, I'll go to sand it off, and it didn't work. And it's because I was rushing, and I wasn't letting the tools work for me. So, that's all there is to it. It's a thing. To just be patient. Just be patient. Let it do its thing. It's kind of a misnomer too. I've used the feature a couple of times on my channel here. But when you see people doing things so quickly and they speed up the video, it's like, oh my god, that doesn't seem to take long at all. And having had experience with some of these things now over time, it's like, oh, that takes a long time. So they only showed you part of the process and certainly sped it up. And there's a reason for that. I mean, how many brush strokes do you need to see in order to know that your brush stroke should be good? Or how many times do you need to watch me sand this thing in order to know you should take your time and be patient? And that's really the size of it. Excuse me. There we go. So as you can see, that's coming along quite nicely. We're preserving the detail here. I wasn't too worried about taping this off to protect it. It's a hard enough edge, and I can use some cocktail sticks to scrape that away. But like I said, if you want to protect a certain detail from any sanding damage, then by all means put a piece of tape over it and cover it. It works quite well. Does it work all the time? No, there'll be exceptions, in which case you'll just have to be much more disciplined in the application of your sanding medium. So I'm just going to keep working on that off screen, because you don't need to watch me do, but you can see what I have left to do. So I have to get a grip on this leading edge here, and then just fine tune what's going on there. I might need to add a little bit back in there, but we'll see once I remove this stuff here. But there you have it. So I'm going to show you a comparison here. So there's, because it's white putty and I'm using white paper towel, but you can see I'm starting to restore the original shape there. And that's going to work just fine on the custom. With the wing here, I'm still working the final bits of it. It looks a little messy on camera, probably because it's a little bit messy in real life. Once I finish that up, you can see it's starting to mimic the shape of the forward bracket, and then I'll be able to seat the wing in there and carry on. I did have to put some super glue on this just to kind of seal it in, which is okay. Another way to do this would have been just to basically shove putty in there and then drill that hole back in, but I wanted to show you that you could put the putty on and then move it around with a cocktail stick or whatever to create shapes as well. So I'm going to keep on refining those. And I will show you the final result in the next episode when we move on to the next step. So in the meantime, I hope all your projects are going extremely well. If not, and you have questions, please leave them down below and I'll answer them as soon as I can. And to all my subscribers, thanks again. And if you're just joining us for the first time, please like and subscribe. So until next time, be safe and have fun.